Okay, so I had a 2002 Impala V6 3.4 liter. Symptom was no crank. So let's take a look at the cranking system here. So this is our ignition switch. Feeds power through the crank position down through the fuse block. Now this fuse block is in the interior. I'll show you that here in a minute. And then it feeds down to the PCM. There's a voltage divider here, and the PCM watches the change in voltage so it knows when the crank signal is being sent to it. Then PCM sends a signal back out to this crank relay, and then that closes this contact. Power flows down through the starter motor to start it. So I'll show you how to test that here in a second, but the PCM receives an input from the body control module for security issues. So if there's a security problem or car thinks it's being stolen, it will disable this output to the crank relay. Okay, so we come over here to our underhood PDC, power distribution center, fuse box, whatever you want to call it. You can tell by the diagram that this right here's our crank relay. Pretty standard relay. I just so happen to have an ancient Sumerian technology here. This is a test relay. So plug this in there, switch it on. Okay, so we can tell that the starter runs. I'll just give you an idea here. Here are the two pins. One of them's power and one of them's starter signal. I don't remember which one's which off the top of my head, but if you just jump those two upper right and lower left pins together, it should do something. It should do this. Okay, so that's how you test to see if the starter runs. Okay, so we come over here to our driver's side fuse box. Take a look here, see what we got. PCM, whoops, PCM's right here. PCM crank. So this is our crank fuse. Now what we just did there with the relay was we have just effectively tested this entire side here. So we know the relay is good. Well, we don't know the relay is good. We know that power to the starter is good. Okay, we'll put it that way. Power to the starter is good for sure. So now what we need to do is we're going to test our voltage here on this crank fuse. Okay, so we're going to come over here. And, okay, so we come over here, turn our key on. God, that's annoying. So we got power on our PCM fuse, and we've got no power on our start fuse. So let's see if I can do this. God, that's annoying. Put our probe on the start crank fuse, crank it, and it goes up to 12 volts. So we know from that testing that we have power to here. God, will you shut the hell up? Okay, so what can we assume so far? We know we have power here, and we know that this works. So the next thing we need to do is test our contacts here at the PCM. Now the PCM sits in here in this box. Now I actually did this because it's the first time I've ever ran into this problem, but you don't really need to. You can test the relays here, but the most likely problem you're going to find is that the ignition switch contains an immobilizer, basically. So every manufacturer has their own name for immobilizer. GM happens to call it pass lock on this particular one. Now in here, this is the ignition switch and tumbler, by the way. So in here is your pass lock connections. This goes to the BCM, and it tells the ignition switch PCM combo whether or not it needs to disable the security lock. So you can test that by disassembling all this paneling here. You got to take the whole thing across, take the paneling out, pull the ignition switch signal out, and you need to turn this key to the run position, push that little where the hell to go? Yeah, push this little block down right here and pop the ignition switch with the tumbler out. Okay, magic. That'll give you access to this. You can get that connector out of there without breaking it, but this one's going to get replaced anyway, so I kind of destroyed it. But you want to test for 5 volts on the yellow wire with this unhooked. Okay, now if you have 5 volts on that wire, then you need to check for 12 volts on the white wire and 0 volts to the black wire, basically ground. If you have those voltages, then you need to put one of these in it. And there is a programming procedure. You may or may not have to perform this. Sometimes they'll just start. But here's the procedure for transferring the secret key to the PCM BCM ignition module. And if none of this works, then you probably have another problem and you need to start over.